ideological. Stormwater runoff is not ideological. Bridges are not ideological. County prison systems are not ideological. It is not an ideological battle like it is at a state level and at a federal level. And you are required and expected to come up with pragmatic solutions. Pragmatic solutions. What are you going to do with the state's failure to deal with the traffic congestion problem because they're dumping so many people off of I-whatever? What are you going to do with the fact that you're having great difficulty attracting business to your county because you find yourself in a position where you don't have sufficient sewer resources, the water is not adequate? What do? Your simple, complex, but pragmatic solutions people are looking for. And that's why I'm running for president, because I think there are pragmatic answers to every one of the problems we face. I think they're straightforward answers. I don't think there's a single thing beyond our capacity to deal with. But first, we have to get control of one thing. I know people say to me that I'm always talking about Iraq. I am always talking about Iraq. Because Iraq's sort of like the boulder sitting in the middle of the road. Until we deal with the problem of Iraq, we do not have the credibility internationally to deal with other looming problems, like a country like Pakistan that's larger than Russia, bristling with nuclear weapons, that is on the verge of chaos, that has a significant middle class but a very radicalized Islamic minority. We're in a situation where until we get the situation in Iraq settled, few people, few countries around the world are willing to follow our lead in dealing with any of the myriad problems, including the totalitarian tilt of Putin, or what's going on in Venezuela, Chavez, who's de-democratizing that region of the world. But also, and by the way, when we talk about Iraq, we have to be honest with you all. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Iraq, you don't worry. But here's the point. This whole notion that this surge is working is fantasy. I've been to Iraq more than anyone else running for president. I've been to Iraq more than every other Democratic candidate combined. I know each and every one of the major players in Iraq. From Hashemi to Barzani to Talabani, I've known them now for the last 6 years. I meet with them regularly. I go every 6 months. Ladies and gentlemen, anything we ask our military to do, they can do. They will do, and they have done. And they have succeeded. Remember the purpose of the surge in Iraq. The surge was to provide what? If we were in school, I could start the sentence, you could finish it. The surge was to what? Provide breathing room. Breathing room for what purpose? The purpose of providing the breathing room was for the political parties to get together and work out a coalition government to end their civil war, so that in fact there would be peace and we could leave. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no political progress taking place in Iraq among the major factions. So it is true, our military women and men, and they're incredible, by the way. They're absolutely incredible. They're brave as hell, and I don't use this kind of phraseology very often. They get in these up-armored Humvees knowing they're likely to get blown up every single solitary day, and they ride down the same damn streets every day. And they have their partners, you see them blown up in front of them, they get back in those vehicles and they do it the next day. They've done their job. But ladies and gentlemen, there's only one way out of Iraq without leaving chaos behind. That's the Biden exit strategy, which now has been adopted by 75 United States senators, most world leaders, every major leader in Iraq save one, and the vast majority of the foreign policy establishment, Democrat as well as Republican. Henry Kissinger, Madeleine Albright. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason I mention this to you is that there's a second problem. Unless we settle the war in Iraq, your job is going to become increasingly more difficult. Increasingly more difficult. Why? In order for us to get the flexibility back at the federal level, to be able to meet our responsibility to you. I emphasize the word responsibility to you. We need to end this war. It's costing us $125 billion a year. I predict to you it will be $150 billion this year. We've already accumulated an indebtedness and a responsibility that equals $1,500 billion. You have a natural disaster, God forbid, in your county. Don't count on the National Guard. The reason you can't count on them, they're over there. Even when they're here. You saw what happened in Kansas with that terrible tornado that wiped out a town. The Kansas National Guard did not have the trucks and the vehicles to get there to help. Why? It's in Iraq. Right now, in order for us to refurbish the equipment of the National Guards collectively in the nation, we'd have to come up with $108 billion. That's how much equipment has been lost or taken away. It affects you. It affects your ability to do your job in an emergency. Ladies and gentlemen, for $120 billion a year, imagine what the federal government can do in meeting its responsibility just affecting what's on your song sheet. Chris talked about infrastructure. Some of you may remember, you old-timers in NACO. I joined NACO and was the first person back in 1992, along with the Conference of Mayors, to propose spending $20 billion a year. Remember in infrastructure? You guys did a report. You were right. Your report pointed out what I knew and you knew, that the infrastructure in America is crumbling. 587,000 bridges in America. 124,000 in the shape of the Minnesota Bridge. 124,000. Just to deal with those bridges is $10 billion a year for the next 5 years. What about, raise your hand if you have no problem with stormwater runoff. Raise your hand if you have no problem with your sewer systems at all, and no anticipated needs. Raise your hand if you think the infrastructure in your county is on target to meet its needs. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been derelict. We've been derelict. Ladies and gentlemen, how many of you in here have any control over county prisons or lockups at all? You're like us, a few, right? Not a problem, is it? Not a problem, is it? Meth doesn't bother you all out here, right? You got no problem. I wrote the Biden crime bill years ago from my perspective as a county official. When I sat down and wrote that bill, it was county law enforcement who helped me write that bill. It not only put 100,000 cops on the street, what it did was it spent $10 billion on prevention and $10 billion on prisons. And you got a little bit of breathing room. But most importantly, violent crime rate dropped 8.5% per year, every year, from the day that bill, from the year after that bill was enacted. They zeroed it out, like sewer funds and a lot of other things. What happened? In this beautiful state of yours, your crime rate's up. It's up all across America. The cost of maintaining your prisons is up. And I ain't going to talk about what you have to do with undocumented aliens. That's no problem, right? None of you have any of those problems. In terms of cost, ladies and gentlemen, what we've done to the counties, what we've done to all of you, is not conscionable. We've zeroed out a number of the programs. And when I was a councilman, straight through until 2001 or 2, even through the Reagan administration, we had some recognition that there was joint responsibility. When's the last time you were called in? Your national leaders. When's the last time you were called in to sit down with the administration and or with a major committee in Congress before we wrote legislation to ask, what is it going to be like? What's the impact on all of it? When I wrote the crime bill, when I wrote the violence against women bill,